The fever had taken Katherine Keating's mother 3 days before the wagon master declared they could wait no longer. And the finality of those words still echoed in her ears as she stood watching the last canvas top disappear over the eastern ridge of the Nevada desert in 1878. She had buried her mother with her own hands in the hard earth beside a creek that would likely dry up come summer, marking the grave with stones she could barely lift. The wagon master had given her until dawn, but when morning came and Katherine was still hollow-eyed and trembling with exhaustion, he had made his decision without ceremony. They were 3 weeks behind schedule, running low on supplies, and the mountain passes would not wait for one orphaned girl's grief. The other families had looked away as the wagons rolled forward, their sympathy measured against their own survival. Katherine understood, even as her heart shattered. This was the West, and mercy was a luxury few could afford. Now she stood alone with a single trunk of possessions, 2 blankets, her mother's Bible, and enough dried beef to last perhaps a week if she was careful. The nearest settlement was Jordan Valley, Oregon, though she had only the vaguest notion of which direction that might be. The wagon train had been heading west toward California's gold fields, but they had taken so many turns through the desert valleys that Katherine felt utterly lost in this vast brown landscape. The September sun beat down mercilessly, and Katherine knew she needed shelter before nightfall. She dragged her trunk beneath a scrubby juniper tree and sat down to think. 20 years old, orphaned, abandoned, and completely alone in a wilderness that cared nothing for her fears or her tears. Her hands were still blistered from digging her mother's grave, and her dress was stained with dust and sweat. The practical part of her mind, the part her mother had trained since childhood, began making calculations. Water first. She had perhaps 2 days' worth in her canteen. Food second. Then fire. Then some kind of plan. But the other part of her mind, the part that was still a frightened girl, wanted to curl up in the dirt and weep until there was nothing left inside her. She did neither. Instead, she opened the trunk and took inventory with shaking hands. 3 dresses, all worn thin from the journey. Undergarments. Her mother's wedding ring, which Katherine now wore on a chain around her neck. A small pouch of coins, perhaps $10 in total. A knife. A flint for starting fires. The dried beef, some hardtack, and a small sack of cornmeal. It was not much with which to face the wilderness. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Katherine gathered what dry brush she could find and built a small fire. The nights in the high desert were cold, and she would need its warmth. She ate a small piece of beef and a corner of hardtack, forcing herself to chew slowly though her stomach cramped with hunger. Rations had been short even before her mother fell ill. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by every sound of the desert night. Coyotes howled in the distance, and once she heard something large moving through the brush nearby. She fed the fire and clutched her knife and prayed for morning. Dawn brought no relief, only the harsh reality of another day alone. Katherine knew she could not stay here. Without a reliable water source, she would die. She had seen enough death on the wagon trail to know how quickly it could come. She closed the trunk, tried to lift it, and realized immediately that carrying it was impossible. The decision broke something in her heart, but she made it anyway. She opened the trunk again and removed only what she could carry in a bundle made from one of the blankets. 1 change of clothes, the Bible, the coins, the knife, the food, the other blanket. Everything else her family had owned, everything they had carried across half a continent, she left beneath the juniper tree. Then Katherine Keating began to walk. She followed the creek bed because it seemed the most logical choice, even though the water had dwindled to occasional muddy pools. Animals needed water. People settled near water. If she followed the creek, perhaps she would find help. The sun climbed higher, and the temperature rose until the air itself seemed to shimmer with heat. Her bonnet provided some shade, but her throat grew dry and her lips began to crack. By midday, she allowed herself 3 small sips from her canteen. By mid-afternoon, her feet ached with every step, and her bundle felt as though it weighed 100 pounds. She saw no one. Nothing but endless desert, scattered with sage and juniper, beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. As evening approached, Katherine knew she could not walk much farther. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. She needed to stop, to rest, to build another fire. Tomorrow she would have to find water or die trying. She had just bent to gather brush when she heard it. The sound of a horse's hooves on stone. Katherine froze, her heart suddenly pounding. In this lawless territory, a lone woman was vulnerable to dangers her mother had only whispered about, but she had no strength to run and nowhere to hide. She straightened slowly and turned toward the sound, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. The rider came around a rocky outcropping, sitting tall in his saddle on a buckskin horse. He was a cowboy. That much was immediately clear from his worn leather chaps, his dust-covered hat, and the rifle resting across his saddle. He saw her and pulled up short, clearly as surprised as she was. They stared at each other for a long moment across the desert brush. Katherine tried to stand straighter, to not show her fear or exhaustion. The man pushed his hat back slightly, and she could see his face was tanned and weathered, with a dark beard covering his jaw. He looked to be perhaps 25, lean and hard from life in the saddle. "Madam," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse or dust. "You lost." Katherine's throat was so dry she had to swallow twice before she could answer. "My wagon train left me behind. I buried my mother 3 days ago, and when morning came, they had moved on." The cowboy's expression shifted, something dark and angry flickering across his features. "They left you alone out here. They were behind schedule. Winter is coming." Katherine heard how hollow her own voice sounded. "I understand their reasoning." "The hell you do." The cowboy swung down from his horse in one fluid motion and walked toward her. Katherine took an involuntary step back, and he stopped immediately, raising his hand slightly. "I am not going to hurt you, madam. My name is Benjamin Lawson. I work for the Triple C Ranch, about 15 miles north of here. I have been out checking the boundary lines and looking for strays." "Katherine Keating," she managed. Benjamin's eyes took in her condition with a practiced glance. The cracked lips, the trembling hands, the desperate exhaustion written across her face. "When did you last have water?" "This morning. A little." He moved slowly, clearly trying not to frighten her, and took a canteen from his saddle. "Drink, slow and steady." Katherine took the canteen with shaking hands and forced herself to drink in small sips, though every fiber of her being wanted to gulp it down. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the finest thing she had ever consumed. "Where were you headed?" Benjamin asked, his voice gentler now. "Jordan Valley, perhaps, or anywhere with people. I am not entirely certain where I am." Jordan Valley is 40 miles northeast, across some of the roughest country in this territory. You would not have made it another day in this direction. He said it plainly, without accusation, but Katherine felt the weight of how close to death she had come. "Then I am fortunate you found me." Benjamin looked at the bundle at her feet, at the empty landscape around them, and then back at her face. She saw him making calculations, weighing options. "It is too late to ride tonight. I will make camp here, and in the morning I will take you to the ranch. The owners are good people. They will help you figure out where to go from here." Katherine wanted to weep with relief, but she had no tears left. "Thank you." Benjamin set about making camp with the efficient movements of a man who had done it 1,000 times. He built a fire much larger than Katherine could have managed, unsaddled his horse and set it to graze on a long tether, and pulled supplies from his saddlebags. He handed her more water and a piece of beef jerky that was far better quality than anything she had eaten in weeks. As darkness fell, and the stars emerged in their thousands across the desert sky, Benjamin cooked a simple meal of beans and bacon in a small skillet over the fire. The smell made Katherine's stomach clench with hunger. He divided the food carefully and handed her the larger portion on a tin plate. "Thank you," Katherine said again. The words seemed inadequate. "Your folks were heading to California?" Benjamin asked, settling himself on the opposite side of the fire. "Yes, the goldfields. My father died of cholera in Kansas, but my mother was determined to continue. She had a brother in Sacramento, or so she hoped. We had not heard from him in 3 years. I am sorry for your loss." Katherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The kindness in his voice threatened to crack the careful control she had maintained over her grief. They ate in silence for a while. The food settled warmly in Katherine's empty stomach, and for the first time in days, she felt something other than numb desperation. She studied Benjamin across the fire. His face was kind despite its weathered hardness, and his movements were careful and deliberate. She had met enough rough men on the Wagon trail to recognize decency when she saw it. "How long have you worked for the Triple C?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own dark thoughts. 4 years now. Came west from Texas after the war ended, drifted for a while, and landed here. The owners, Clayton and Katherine Morrison, they treat their hands fair, give a man honest wages for honest work. The war, Katherine repeated softly. You fought. Too young for most of it, thank God. Saw the tail end when I was barely 16. Saw enough. Benjamin poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks drifting into the night. This country out here, it lets a man leave his past behind if he has a mind to. Katherine heard the weight of things unsaid in those words. I suppose I am leaving my past behind too, whether I wish to or not. Benjamin looked up at her, and in the firelight his eyes were dark and serious. You have people anywhere. Family. An uncle in Sacramento, as I said, but I have no way to reach him. No money for stage fare, and I would not even know where to begin looking. Katherine wrapped her arms around herself against the cold night air. I suppose I will need to find work somewhere. I can read and write and cipher. I can cook and sew and keep a house. Someone might have need of a hired girl. Jordan Valley is a rough town, Benjamin said carefully. Most towns out here are. A woman alone, it can be hard. The kind of work available is not always the kind you would want. Katherine understood his meaning and felt her cheeks flush. I will do what is necessary to survive, within reason. I did not mean to imply anything about your character, madam. I only meant to say that this country is not kind to women without protection. Benjamin shifted, looking uncomfortable. The Morrisons might let you stay on at the ranch for a while. Mrs. Morrison is always complaining about how much work there is with just her and the cook. If you were willing to help out, they might give you room and board until you figure out your next step. Hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered in Katherine's chest. Do you think they truly might? Cannot promise anything, but Mrs. Morrison has a kind heart. She came out here as a bride 20 years ago and built that ranch with her own 2 hands alongside her husband. She knows what it is to be a woman facing hard country. Katherine pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Then I will hope for their kindness and be grateful for whatever help they can offer. They talked a while longer, Benjamin telling her about the ranch and the territory, Katherine sharing carefully edited stories of the Wagon trail. She did not speak of the worst parts, the graves they had passed, the children who had died, the slow, terrible way her mother had faded. Those memories were still too raw. Eventually, Benjamin banked the fire and gave her the better of his 2 bedrolls, insisting he was used to sleeping rough and would be comfortable enough with his saddle as a pillow. Katherine lay down near the fire's warmth, exhaustion pulling at her despite the hard ground and the strangeness of sleeping in the desert with a man she had just met. But something in Benjamin's steady presence made her feel safe for the first time since her mother had fallen ill. She woke once in the deep night and saw him sitting up, keeping watch, his rifle across his knees. The sight should have frightened her, but instead it let her sink back into sleep, knowing someone was standing between her and the dangers of the wilderness. Morning came with the sharp cold of desert dawn. Katherine woke to find Benjamin already up, the fire rebuilt, and coffee brewing in a battered pot. The smell alone was enough to make her feel more human. He handed her a cup without a word, and she wrapped her hands around the warm tin and sipped carefully. "We should head out soon," Benjamin said. "It will take most of the day to reach the ranch, and I want to be there before dark." Katherine nodded and moved behind some rocks to take care of necessities, then rolled up the bedroll and gathered her bundle. Benjamin saddled his horse, a magnificent buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. "His name is Buck," Benjamin said, catching her looking. "Original, I know. He is as steady as they come." The question of how they would both ride hung in the air. Katherine had ridden before, but always side-saddle on gentle mares. This was clearly a working cowboy's horse, and there was only one saddle. Benjamin settled the question by swinging up into the saddle and then holding his hand down to her. "Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up. You will have to ride in front." Katherine hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His grip was strong and calloused, and with surprising ease he pulled her up to sit sideways in front of him, her bundle secured behind the saddle. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, and Katherine tried not to think about how close they were, how improper this was. But propriety was a luxury for people who had choices, and she had none. "Comfortable enough?" Benjamin asked, his voice close to her ear. "Yes, thank you." Buck started forward at Benjamin's command, falling into an easy walk that covered ground steadily without being too jarring. Katherine had to lean back slightly against Benjamin's chest to keep her balance, and she felt the solid warmth of him behind her. It was strange and unsettling and oddly comforting all at once. They rode through the morning as the sun climbed higher, and the desert began to reveal its austere beauty. The land here was not the flat emptiness Katherine had imagined. Instead it rolled and folded, cut through with arroyos and studded with strange rock formations that stood like monuments to forgotten gods. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the September heat. Benjamin talked as they rode, pointing out landmarks and explaining the country. That mesa to the north was where the ranch's boundary began. That line of cottonwoods marked a year-round creek where the cattle gathered in summer. Those tracks were from a pronghorn antelope, and those from a coyote. His voice was low and pleasant, and Katherine found herself relaxing into the rhythm of his words and the horse's steady gait. Around midday, they stopped to rest Buck and eat a cold meal from Benjamin's supplies. Katherine's body ached from the unaccustomed position in the saddle, but she did not complain. This discomfort was nothing compared to the alternative of still being alone in the desert. "Tell me about the Morrisons," Katherine said as they sat in the shade of a rock formation. "So I know what to expect," Benjamin considered for a moment, choosing his words. "Clayton Morrison is as fair a man as you will find, tough when he needs to be, but never cruel. He expects an honest day's work, but he pays fairly and treats his hands with respect. Mrs. Morrison, Katherine. She is the heart of the place. She manages the house, keeps the books, doctors the hands when they are sick, and somehow still finds time to keep a garden that should not be possible in this climate. They never had children of their own, which I think is a sorrow to them both, but they treat their ranch hands like family. And how many hands are there? 6 regular, plus a cook named Martha who has been with them since the beginning, sometimes more during roundup or when we move the herd. It is not a huge operation, maybe 1,000 head of cattle, but it is solid and well run. Katherine tried to imagine it. A real home, even if only temporarily. A place to rest and recover and figure out what came next. And you think they will truly consider taking me in? Benjamin met her eyes. I think if you are willing to work hard and pull your weight, they will give you a chance. That is all anyone can ask for out here. They rode on through the afternoon, and the land gradually began to change. The harshest desert gave way to grassland, sparse at first but growing thicker. They crossed several small creeks, and Katherine saw cattle bearing the CCC brand grazing peacefully. The sight of the animals, fat and healthy, spoke well of the ranch's management. The sun was lowering toward the western mountains when Benjamin pointed ahead to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley where 2 creeks met. There it is. Home. Katherine felt her heart begin to pound with nervousness as they drew closer. The ranch was larger than she had expected. The main house was built of logs, solid and well-maintained, with a wide porch across the front. Behind it stood a large barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Smoke rose from the main house's chimney, and she could see chickens pecking in a yard enclosed by neat fencing. As they rode into the yard, a woman emerged from the house, shielding her eyes against the sun. She was perhaps 45, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the weathered complexion of someone who spent her life outdoors. Her dress was simple but clean, covered by a work apron. "Benjamin Lawson, you are a day later than expected," she called out. "I was about to send someone looking for you." "Sorry, Mrs. Morrison, I had a bit of a detour." Benjamin swung down from Buck and then carefully helped Katherine dismount. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, stiff from hours in the saddle. Katherine Morrison's sharp eyes took in Katherine's appearance in an instant. The worn dress, the exhausted pallor, the desperate hope barely concealed. She walked closer, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "This is Miss Katherine Keating," Benjamin said. "I found her alone in the desert yesterday evening. Her wagon train left her behind after her mother died." Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. "Dear God, left you alone." "What kind of people would do such a thing?" "Desperate people, madam," Katherine said quietly. "They were behind schedule and low on supplies. I understand their choice, even if I wish it had been different." Katherine looked at Katherine with an expression that was equal parts horror and admiration. Then she stepped forward and took Katherine's hands in her own. "You poor child. Come inside immediately. You look half dead on your feet. We will get you fed and cleaned up, and then we will figure out the rest." The kindness in her voice, the maternal warmth of it, broke through the last of Katherine's defenses. She felt tears begin to slip down her cheeks, and once they started, she could not stop them. All the fear and grief and exhaustion of the past days came pouring out. Katherine Morrison pulled her into a firm embrace, and Katherine clung to her like a drowning woman to a lifeline. "There now," Katherine murmured. "You are safe. You are going to be just fine. Let it out, child. You have earned these tears." Over Katherine's head, Katherine looked at Benjamin with approval. "You did well bringing her here." Benjamin nodded, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "I could not very well leave her out there. Many men would have." "Take care of your horse and then come up for supper. You can tell us the whole story then. Benjamin touched his hat brim and led Buck toward the barn. Katherine pulled back from Catherine's embrace, wiping at her eyes with embarrassment. I apologize, madam. I did not mean to break down like that. Nonsense. You have been through an ordeal. Come inside now. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, with well-made furniture and bright woven rugs on the wood floors. Katherine led Katherine to a rocking chair near the large stone fireplace and pressed a cup of cool water into her hands. Drink slowly. When was the last time you had a proper meal? I am not certain. Several days. Katherine made a disapproving sound and bustled toward the kitchen area. Martha is preparing supper, but I can get you something to tide you over. Some bread and butter, perhaps, and we should heat water for a bath. You will feel better once you are clean. Katherine wanted to protest, to say she did not deserve such kindness from strangers, but the words would not come. Instead, she sat in the rocking chair and drank her water and watched Katherine Morrison move efficiently around her home with the practiced ease of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was about. A few minutes later, a stout woman with graying red hair emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Kathy, Benjamin just told me we have a guest. Oh, you poor lamb, look at you, thin as a rail and worn to the bone. This is Martha Brennan, our cook, Katherine said. Martha, this is Katherine Keating. She will be staying with us for a while. Katherine noticed that Katherine had stated it as fact, not a question, and gratitude welled up in her chest. Thank you, both of you. I cannot tell you what your kindness means. We will have time for thanks later, Martha said briskly. Right now you need food and rest. I will slice some bread and cheese, and Kathy, you get that washtub set up. Girl needs a good scrubbing. Over the next hour, Katherine was fed, bathed in warm water scented with lavender, and dressed in a borrowed nightgown of Katherine's. Her own clothes were taken away to be washed and mended. Katherine showed her to a small bedroom off the kitchen, simply furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. This was meant to be a sewing room, but it never quite became that, Katherine explained. It will serve well enough for you. Rest now. We will talk more at supper. Katherine lay down on the bed, and the softness of the mattress after weeks of sleeping on the hard wagon bed, and then the ground was almost overwhelming. She meant to rest just a few minutes, but exhaustion dragged her down into deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to someone gently shaking her shoulder. Miss Keating, Katherine, supper is ready. Katherine opened her eyes to find Katherine smiling down at her. Sunlight no longer streamed through the window. She had slept for hours. I am sorry. I did not mean to sleep so long. You needed it. Come now. Everyone is gathered. Katherine quickly washed her face and hands in the basin and tried to smooth her sleep-tangled hair. Then she followed Katherine to the dining room where a long table was set for 8. Clayton Morrison rose when she entered, a tall man with broad shoulders and graying hair, his face kind but weathered. Benjamin was there too, cleaned up and seated beside 2 other cowboys. Miss Keating, welcome to our home, Clayton said formally. Benjamin has told us something of your circumstances. You have our deepest condolences for your loss and our apologies for how you were treated. Thank you, sir. Please sit. You must be hungry. The meal was simple but plentiful. Roasted venison, potatoes, fresh bread, beans, and even pie for dessert. Katherine had to force herself to eat slowly, to not show how desperately hungry she was. As they ate, Benjamin filled in the details of how he had found her, and Katherine added her own parts of the story, though she kept the most painful parts brief. The 2 other cowboys were introduced as James Wright and Thomas Ford, both young men perhaps a year or 2 older than Benjamin, weathered and lean like all working cowboys. They were respectful and kind, but Katherine saw the way they looked at her. Not with the predatory interest she had feared, but with sympathy and curiosity. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need," Clayton said when the story was complete. "Katherine has been after me to find more help for her, and it seems Providence has provided. If you are willing to work, we will provide room and board and a small wage." "I am willing," Katherine said immediately. "I am grateful for the opportunity." Katherine smiled. "We will start slowly. You need to recover your strength first, but there is always plenty to do. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, mending, gardening. Martha and I will be glad of the help." After supper, the men retired to the bunkhouse or to the porch for a smoke, and Katherine showed Katherine around the house properly. The ranch house was well organized, with a large kitchen and pantry, a sitting room, the dining room, 3 bedrooms upstairs for the Morrisons and any guests, and Katherine's small room off the kitchen. There was even a small library, with perhaps 24 books carefully preserved on shelves Clayton had built. "I never had much schooling," Katherine confided, "but Clayton taught me to read and write when we first married. These books are treasures to us. You are welcome to borrow any you like." Katherine ran her fingers along the spines reverently. She had always loved reading, and books had been scarce on the wagon train. "Thank you. I will treat them with care." That night, lying in her narrow bed in the small room, Katherine listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses moving in the corrals, the lowing of cattle in the distance, men's voices talking low on the porch. Through her window she could see stars scattered across the sky in their millions, bright and cold and impossibly far away. She thought of her mother lying in that lonely grave in the desert. She thought of the wagon train rolling on without her, the families who had shared the trail for months now vanished from her life as though they had never been. She thought of her father's grave in Kansas, marked only with a wooden cross that would rot away to nothing within a few years. And she thought of Benjamin Lawson, riding through the desert at just the right moment to save her life. If he had taken a different path, if he had passed an hour earlier or later, she would have died alone in that wilderness. The odds of him finding her seemed impossibly small, and yet it had happened. Perhaps, Katherine thought, Providence truly had played a hand. Perhaps this was where she was meant to be. The days settled into a rhythm that was both challenging and deeply comforting. Katherine rose before dawn each morning and worked alongside Katherine and Martha, learning the routines of the ranch household. There was always work to be done. Breakfast for 9 people to cook and serve, dishes to wash, bread to bake, clothes to wash and mend, chickens to feed and eggs to collect, a garden to tend, though most of it was finishing for the season, preserves to put up for winter, floors to sweep and scrub. Katherine threw herself into the work with determination. She had always been industrious, but now she felt a desperate need to prove her worth, to show the Morrisons they had not made a mistake in taking her in. Katherine had to tell her several times to slow down, to not work herself sick. "You are not a slave, child," Katherine said one afternoon, finding Katherine scrubbing the kitchen floor for the 2nd time that week. "You are part of this household. You are allowed to rest." But rest felt dangerous to Katherine. When she rested, she thought about all she had lost. When she worked, she could push those thoughts away. Benjamin continued his work around the ranch, checking fences, moving cattle, breaking young horses, and doing the 1,000 other tasks that ranching required. Katherine saw him most days at meals, and sometimes in the evenings when the hands gathered on the porch after supper. He was quiet around her, respectful, always calling her Miss Keating in a formal tone that created distance between them. Yet Katherine found herself watching for him, looking up when she heard his voice, finding excuses to bring coffee or water out to wherever the men were working. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. He had saved her life, and she felt drawn to him out of natural thankfulness. But as the days turned to weeks and September gave way to October, Katherine began to recognize the truth. It was not just gratitude. It was the way her heart beat faster when he smiled, the way she noticed the strength in his hands and the kindness in his eyes, the way his rare laughter made something warm unfold in her chest. She was falling in love with Benjamin Lawson, and the realization terrified her. Katherine had never had time for romance. The Wagon trail had been about survival, not courtship. And before that, her life had been consumed with helping her parents prepare for the journey west. She had received attention from young men back home in Missouri, but her father had been protective and her mother practical, and Katherine had never let her heart become engaged. Now, homeless and dependent on the charity of strangers, was possibly the worst time imaginable to fall in love. And yet, her heart seemed unconcerned with such practical considerations. One evening in mid-October, Katherine was sitting on the porch with Katherine, mending shirts by lamplight when Benjamin came up from the barn. He had been working late, reshoeing horses, and his face was lined with tiredness. "Coffee is still warm," Katherine said. "And there is pie left from supper." "Thank you, madam." Benjamin poured himself coffee and cut a generous slice of the dried apple pie Martha had made. He settled himself on the porch railing, long legs stretched out before him. "You work too hard," Katherine observed. "You and Clayton both. You will wear yourselves out before winter comes." "Winter is why we work so hard now," Benjamin replied with a slight smile. "Getting everything ready." Katherine shook her head fondly and went back to her mending. Katherine kept her eyes on her own work, but she was acutely aware of Benjamin's presence. The smell of leather and horse and honest sweat that surrounded him, the way the lamplight caught the angles of his face. "Miss Keating, you settling in all right?" Benjamin asked after a moment. "Yes, thank you. Everyone has been very kind." "You are proving to be a hard worker," Katherine put in. "I do not know how we managed without her, truly." "I am glad it is working out," Benjamin said, and something in his tone made Katherine look up. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that brief exchange Katherine felt something pass between them. Recognition. Awareness. The acknowledgement of an attraction neither of them had spoken aloud. Then Benjamin looked away, draining his coffee cup in one long swallow. "I should turn in. Early start tomorrow." "Good night, ladies." "Good night," they echoed, and he disappeared into the darkness toward the bunkhouse. Katherine glanced at Katherine, her expression knowing, but she said nothing. Katherine bent her head over her mending, her cheeks warm, and tried to pretend her hands were not shaking. The following Sunday, Katherine announced they would all attend church in Jordan Valley. The ranch was far enough from town that they did not go every week, but when weather and work permitted, the Morrisons made the effort. Katherine had not been off the ranch since her arrival, and the prospect of seeing Jordan Valley filled her with both excitement and nervousness. They traveled in the ranch wagon, pulled by a pair of sturdy horses. Clayton drove with Katherine beside him. Katherine sat in the back with Martha, while Benjamin and two other hands rode alongside on horseback. It was a 2-hour journey across rolling grassland and through shallow canyons, and Katherine watched the landscape pass with interest. Jordan Valley proved to be a small town, barely more than a collection of buildings along a single main street. There was a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a blacksmith, and a white clapboard church that served the scattered ranching families of the region. The church was already filling up when they arrived, and Katherine felt the weight of curious stares as she entered with the Morrison party. The service was simple, led by a circuit preacher who traveled between several towns. The hymns were sung with more enthusiasm than skill, and the sermon was blessedly short. Afterward, people lingered in the churchyard, catching up on news and gossip. Several women approached Katherine to be introduced to Katherine, and she found herself explaining her situation over and over, watching the women's expressions shift from sympathy to calculation as they assessed her status and prospects. "That is Mrs. Thornton," Katherine murmured as a thin, sharp-featured woman walked away after a brief introduction. "She runs the hotel and considers herself the social arbiter of Jordan Valley. She will have your story spread through every household by tomorrow." "Is that good or bad?" Katherine asked. "A bit of both. It establishes that you are a respectable young woman under our protection, but it also marks you as single and available, which will attract attention." "I am not looking for attention." Katherine gave her another of those knowing looks. "Perhaps not. But attention tends to find young women whether they seek it or not." As if to prove her point, a young man approached as they were preparing to leave. He was perhaps 22, well-dressed by frontier standards, with carefully combed hair and a too-wide smile. "Mrs. Morrison, how good to see you," he said with exaggerated courtesy. "And you must be Miss Keating. I am Robert Henderson. My father owns the general store." "How do you do?" Katherine said politely, accepting his handshake briefly. "I heard about your misfortune with the wagon train." "Terrible business. But how fortunate that you ended up at the Triple C. The Morrisons are fine people. They have been very kind. I hope we will see more of you in town. There are precious few young ladies in this territory, and a girl of your obvious refinement must find ranch life rather isolating." Katherine opened her mouth to reply that she found ranch life quite satisfactory, but Benjamin appeared at her elbow before she could speak. "Wagon is ready, Miss Keating," he said quietly. His expression was neutral, but something in his posture suggested he had placed himself deliberately between her and Robert Henderson. "Thank you." Katherine nodded to Robert. "Good day, Mr. Henderson." As they walked toward the wagon, Benjamin said in a low voice, "Robert Henderson is known to have high opinions of himself and low respect for others. You would do well to keep your distance. I appreciate the warning." Benjamin helped her up into the wagon bed, his hand warm and strong around hers. For a moment, they were close enough that Katherine could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the clean scent of the soap he had used that morning. Then he released her hand and stepped back, and the moment passed. On the ride home, Martha entertained them with gossip from the other women, and Katherine and Clayton discussed ranch business. Katherine only half listened, her mind still caught on that moment with Benjamin. The way he had positioned himself protectively, the warmth of his hand, the concern in his eyes. She was no longer falling in love, Katherine realized. She had already fallen. The landing was going to hurt when he did not catch her. November brought the first serious cold, and with it the hard work of preparing the ranch for winter. Katherine helped Katherine and Martha in the enormous task of preserving food. They dried beef, salted pork, stored root vegetables in the cellar, and put up the last of the garden produce in jars. The kitchen was steaming and fragrant with the smells of cooking, and by evening Katherine was exhausted but satisfied with honest labor. The cattle were moved to lower pastures, where they could better survive the winter weather. Benjamin and the other hands worked dawn to dusk, and Katherine saw the toll it took. They came in each evening bone tired and saddle sore, but there was a satisfaction in their weariness. They were beating winter to the punch, getting everything ready. One evening Benjamin came in later than usual, his face gray with exhaustion. He barely ate supper before excusing himself, but Katherine noticed he was favoring his right hand. After the other men had left, she caught him at the door. "You are hurt. Just a rope burn, nothing serious." "Let me see." Benjamin hesitated, then held out his hand. The palm was badly abraded, the skin torn and seeping. Katherine drew in a sharp breath. "This needs to be cleaned and bandaged properly. Come to the kitchen." "Miss Keating, it is late. You should not trouble yourself." "It is no trouble. Come." She led him to the kitchen, where she heated water and retrieved the medical supplies Katherine kept in a wooden box. Benjamin sat at the table, his hand palm up as Katherine carefully cleaned the wound. He flinched once but made no sound. "You should have said something earlier," Katherine scolded gently. "This could fester if not properly tended. I have had worse." "That is not the point." Katherine applied a salve Katherine had made from herbs and wrapped the hand in clean bandaging. "There, keep it dry if you can." "Thank you." Benjamin flexed his fingers carefully, testing the bandage. "You have a gentle touch." Their eyes met, and Katherine found herself unable to look away. They were close in the lamplight kitchen, alone for the first time since he had found her in the desert. The awareness that had been building between them for weeks suddenly felt overwhelming. "Benjamin," Katherine said softly, hardly knowing what she meant to say, "I should go." He stood abruptly, the moment breaking. "Thank you for tending the wound." He was gone before Katherine could respond, leaving her alone in the kitchen with her heart racing and the smell of herbal salve in the air. The first snow came the following week, a light dusting that melted by midday but signaled what was coming. The ranch settled into its winter rhythm. The hands worked shorter days, focusing on feeding cattle and maintaining equipment. The evenings grew long, and after supper everyone gathered in the main house for company. Clayton would read aloud from books or newspapers. Katherine would sew or mend. The men would play cards or checkers. It was domestic and peaceful, and Katherine found herself more content than she had been in years, except for the constant awareness of Benjamin. He was always there, just at the edge of her vision. And she caught him watching her too, his dark eyes following her movements before he looked quickly away. The tension between them grew taut as a bowstring. In early December, Katherine cornered Katherine in the kitchen while they were preparing bread for baking. "You care for him," Katherine said without preamble. It was a statement, not a question. Katherine's hands stilled in the dough. "I do not know what you mean. Benjamin, do not bother denying it. I have eyes, child. And he cares for you too, though he is doing his best to ignore it." Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "It does not matter. I am dependent on your charity. I have no money, no prospects, nothing to offer anyone. And Benjamin is a working cowboy. He cannot afford to take on a wife even if he wanted to, which I am not certain he does. What future could we possibly have?" Katherine dusted flour from her hands and turned Katherine to face her. "Listen to me. That man saved your life and brought you here. He watches you like you are water in the desert, and you light up every time he walks into a room. Life is short and uncertain, especially out here. If you have a chance at happiness, you should reach for it with both hands. But the practicalities will work themselves out if you want them to. Katherine, you are no longer that desperate girl in the desert. You have proven yourself here. You are strong and capable and hardworking. Any man would be lucky to have you. You truly think so. I know so. Now the question is what you are going to do about it." Katherine had no answer, but Katherine's words settled into her heart and began to grow. That evening after supper, Katherine pulled on her shawl and stepped out onto the porch for some air. The night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. She heard footsteps and turned to find Benjamin emerging from the barn. "Evening," he said, touching his hat brim. "Good evening." He climbed the porch steps and stood at the railing, looking out at the dark landscape. Katherine stayed where she was, her heart pounding. Catherine's words echoed in her mind. If you have a chance at happiness, reach for it. Benjamin, she said before she could lose her courage. May I ask you something? Of course. Why did you bring me here? I mean, truly. You could have taken me to Jordan Valley and left me there. It would have been easier. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. I could not leave you to the mercies of that town alone. You would have been eaten alive, and the Morrisons needed help. It seemed like the right thing to do. That is the only reason. He turned to look at her then, and even in the darkness she could see the conflict in his eyes. What do you want me to say, Katherine? It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her breath catch. The truth. Benjamin took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold night air. The truth is, I have not been able to get you out of my mind since the moment I saw you standing alone in that desert, he said roughly. The truth is, every time I see you, I want to pull you into my arms and never let go. The truth is, I am half out of my mind with wanting you. Katherine felt her heart soar. Then why have you kept your distance? Because I have nothing to offer you. I am a cowboy with no land and barely enough wages to keep myself. You deserve better than a life of hardship and struggle. You think I do not know hardship? Katherine stepped closer to him, close enough to touch. I walked across half a continent. I buried my father and my mother. I was left to die in the desert. I have lived hardship, Benjamin, and none of it matters if I am alone. His hand came up to cup her face, calloused and gentle. You deserve everything good in this world. I want you. That is what I deserve, if you want me too. God, Katherine. Of course I want you. He kissed her then, and Katherine felt the world fall away. There was only his mouth on hers, warm and demanding. His arms coming around her, pulling her close. Her hands fisting in his shirt, holding on as if she might blow away. It was nothing like the chaste kisses of her limited experience. This was heat and hunger and desperate need. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. I do not know how to make this work, but I want to try, if you will have me. Yes, Katherine breathed. Yes, I will have you. They stood wrapped in each other's arms on the cold porch, and Katherine thought that she had never been warmer in her life. The next morning at breakfast, Benjamin sat beside Katherine instead of at the far end of the table, and his hand found hers under the tablecloth. Clayton and Katherine exchanged knowing glances but said nothing. Martha smiled into her coffee. The other hands grinned and elbowed each other, but had the sense to keep their comments to themselves. Over the following weeks, Benjamin courted Katherine properly despite the fact that they lived under the same roof and saw each other constantly. He carved her a small wooden bird and left it on her pillow. He saved the best pieces of meat for her plate at meals. He read to her in the evenings from the ranch's small library, his voice making even the driest agricultural reports sound like poetry. And Katherine fell deeper in love with every passing day. They talked about everything. Benjamin told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his family to fever when he was young, about the war and the hard years that followed. Katherine shared memories of her childhood in Missouri, her father's dreams of California gold, her mother's quiet strength. They talked about their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future. I want land someday, Benjamin confided one evening as they walked along the creek that ran through the ranch property. Not a huge spread, but something I can build on, a place that is mine where I can put down roots. That sounds wonderful, Katherine said, her hand warm in his. It is probably a foolish dream. Land is expensive and I have little saved. Dreams are not foolish. They are what keep us going. Benjamin stopped walking and turned to face her. Come with me, Katherine. When I have enough saved, when I can offer you a real home, will you marry me?" Catherine's breath caught. "Are you asking me now or someday?" "Both, neither. I am asking if you will wait for me while I build something worthy of you. You are already worthy of me, you foolish man." Katherine reached up to touch his face. "But yes, yes, I will marry you. Now or someday or whenever you ask." Benjamin pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, and Katherine thought that she had never imagined such happiness was possible. They told the Morrisons that evening. Clayton shook Benjamin's hand with genuine warmth, and Katherine hugged them both with tears in her eyes. "I knew it from the moment Benjamin brought you here," Katherine said. "I told Clayton this would happen." "You did not," Clayton protested mildly. "I absolutely did. I said that boy has met his match." Katherine held Katherine at arm's length, her expression serious. "You are sure about this? Life as a ranch wife is hard, and Benjamin does not have much to offer yet." "I am sure," Katherine said firmly. "I have never been more sure of anything." "Then you have our blessing and our support," Clayton said. "Benjamin, you are like a son to us. We will do what we can to help you get started when the time comes." Benjamin looked overcome. "Sir, I do not know what to say." "Say you will take care of this girl and make her happy. That is all we ask." "I will. I swear it." They decided to wait until spring to marry. Benjamin wanted time to save more money and to prove to Katherine that he could provide for her. Katherine thought it was unnecessary, but she recognized the pride in him that needed to do this, so she agreed to wait. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Katherine had never known what it was like to be courted, to be loved, and she treasured every moment. Benjamin was attentive and protective, yet he respected her strength and independence. He made her laugh with his dry wit. He listened when she talked. He held her when the grief for her parents caught up with her unexpectedly. And the physical attraction between them built to an almost unbearable tension. They were careful to maintain propriety under the Morrisons' roof, but every touch, every kiss, was charged with the promise of more. Sometimes Benjamin would pull her into a shadowed corner of the barn just to kiss her breathless, his hands tangled in her hair, both of them shaking with wanting more than they could have. "Spring cannot come fast enough," Benjamin muttered against her mouth one afternoon, his self-control clearly strained. "We could marry sooner," Katherine suggested breathlessly. "No, I will do this right. You will have a proper wedding and a proper home to come to." Katherine wanted to argue that she did not care about proper, that she only cared about him, but she recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. Benjamin had his mind made up. In February, Clayton took Benjamin aside for a private conversation. When Benjamin emerged, he looked stunned. "What is it?" Katherine asked, concerned. "Clayton is offering me a partnership, a small stake in the ranch in exchange for taking on more responsibility. It is not much, but it would mean steady income and a real future here." "Benjamin, that is wonderful. He is doing it because of you." "Because we are getting married." "He is doing it because you have worked hard and proven yourself. Do not diminish that." Katherine took his hands. "You deserve this opportunity." Benjamin pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I cannot believe this is my life now. 6 months ago, I was just a drifting cowboy. Now I have a home, a future, and you." "We have each other," Katherine corrected. "That is what matters." They set the wedding date for the first Sunday in May. Katherine threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm, sewing Katherine a dress of pale blue calico that brought out her eyes. Martha planned a feast that would feed half of Jordan Valley. Clayton arranged for the circuit preacher to perform the ceremony at the ranch. As spring arrived and the desert bloomed with wildflowers, Katherine felt her happiness grow until it seemed too large to contain. She had come to this territory broken and lost, expecting nothing but hardship. Instead, she had found a home, a family, and a love that filled all the empty places in her heart. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Katherine dressed with Catherine's help, her hands trembling as Katherine arranged her hair and pinned wildflowers into the braids. "You look beautiful," Katherine said softly. "Your mother would be so proud." Katherine touched the chain around her neck where her mother's wedding ring hung. "I hope so. I wish she could have met Benjamin. I think she knows." Mothers have a way of watching over their children even after they are gone. The ceremony was held in the ranch yard, with everyone from the ranch in attendance plus a few neighbors and townspeople who had made the journey. Benjamin stood waiting for her in his best shirt, his hair combed back, his eyes shining with love and promise. Katherine walked to him on Clayton's arm, her heart full to bursting. The vows were simple and traditional, but when Benjamin slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple gold band he had worked extra hours to afford, Katherine felt the weight of the promise they were making. To love and cherish, for better or worse, in sickness and health, for all the days of their lives. "I love you," Benjamin whispered as he kissed her for the first time as her husband. "I love you too," Katherine whispered back. "Always." The celebration lasted into the evening, with food and music and dancing. James Wright produced a fiddle and played surprisingly well, and the ranch hands took turns partnering with Katherine until Benjamin cut in and claimed his bride for the rest of the night. As darkness fell and the party began to wind down, Benjamin led Katherine away from the main house to the small cabin Clayton had helped him build over the winter months. It was simple, just 2 rooms, but it was solid and warm and theirs. Benjamin lit the lamp and turned to Katherine, suddenly shy. "It is not much yet, but I will build onto it as we need more space. It is perfect." Katherine moved into his arms, and all the shyness between them melted away in the heat of their long-denied desire. That night, Benjamin made love to her with tenderness and passion, and Katherine discovered that the happiness she had thought was already complete could deepen and expand even further. In his arms, she was cherished and desired and wholly loved. The painful memories of the desert, of loss and abandonment, seemed to belong to someone else. This was her life now. This man, this home, this love. The weeks after the wedding fell into a new rhythm. Katherine still helped Katherine and Martha with household tasks, but now she had her own home to manage as well. Benjamin worked long days with the cattle, expanding his responsibilities under Clayton's guidance. In the evenings they returned to their cabin, and Katherine learned the intimate dailiness of marriage, cooking meals for 2, mending Benjamin's clothes, falling asleep in his arms and waking to his kisses. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. In June, Katherine realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure before saying anything, hope and nervousness warring in her chest. When she was certain, she told Benjamin one evening after supper. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a huge grin spread across his face and he swept her up into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Katherine, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy? I am terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed." "Yes, I am happy." He kissed her deeply, and Katherine felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. A baby. A family. She had come to this territory as an orphan with nothing, and now she would create the family she had lost. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Katherine's fears. Katherine was a wealth of knowledge and reassurance, having helped birth many calves and foals if not human babies. Martha fed Katherine constantly, convinced she was not eating enough for 2. Benjamin fussed over her like a mother hen, trying to keep her from lifting anything heavy or working too hard. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Katherine protested one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of wet laundry. "I know, but I cannot help worrying. You are the most precious thing in my life." Katherine softened at the love in his voice. "We are both healthy and strong. Everything will be fine." As summer gave way to fall and her belly began to swell with their child, Katherine felt a contentment she had not known was possible. Yes, there were still hard days. Days when she missed her parents with an ache that took her breath away. Days when the work was exhausting and the heat oppressive. But there were so many more good days. Days filled with laughter and love, and the quiet satisfaction of building a life with someone she loved. In late January 1879, on a night when snow fell softly outside their cabin, Katherine went into labor. Katherine and Martha were with her, guiding her through the pain with steady voices and strong hands. Benjamin paced outside, useless and terrified, until Clayton dragged him to the barn to feed horses and give him something to do. After 12 hours of hard labor, Katherine delivered a healthy baby boy with dark hair and his father's strong features. When Benjamin was finally allowed into the room and placed his son in his arms for the first time, Katherine saw tears streaming down her husband's face. "He is perfect," Benjamin whispered. "Katherine, you did so well. He is perfect." "We did well," Katherine corrected, exhausted but glowing with happiness. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for weeks but had not settled on anything definite. Now Benjamin looked down at his son, his expression tender. "Thomas, after my father. Thomas Clayton, if you agree." "Thomas Clayton Lawson," Katherine tested the name. "It is perfect." Their son was perfect, healthy and strong, lunged and hungry, demanding his mother's attention at all hours. Katherine was exhausted and overwhelmed, and more in love than she had ever imagined possible. Benjamin was a devoted father from the start, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, changing his nappies without complaint, looking at his son with wonder in his eyes. The months blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and miraculous firsts. Thomas's first smile, his first tooth, his first attempts to roll over. The ranch community celebrated each milestone, everyone from Clayton to the newest cowhand invested in this child's well-being. By the time Thomas turned 1, Benjamin had built 2 additional rooms onto their cabin and saved enough money to purchase a small herd of his own cattle. His partnership with Clayton was flourishing, and there was talk of expanding the ranch's operations. Katherine had never seen him so confident and settled. "I used to think I was cursed to always be drifting," Benjamin confided one night as they lay in bed, Thomas asleep in his cradle nearby. "Moving from place to place, never putting down roots. I thought that was just my lot in life." "And now?" Katherine asked, her head on his shoulder. "Now I know I was just waiting for the right place and the right person to make it all make sense. You and Thomas, this ranch, this life. This is what I was waiting for." Katherine kissed him softly. "I was lost in the desert and you found me. You saved me in every possible way." "We saved each other," Benjamin corrected. "You gave me a reason to stay, to build something permanent. Before you, I was drifting too." 2 years later, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine Rose, after Catherine Morrison and the roses that grew wild in the desert. Thomas was a devoted big brother from the start, and Benjamin declared himself the luckiest man in the territory. The ranch continued to prosper. Benjamin's herd grew, and his reputation as a fair and knowledgeable cattleman spread. Other ranchers began seeking his advice, and he became a respected member of the community. Katherine divided her time between caring for her growing children and helping Katherine manage the increasingly complex household as the ranch expanded. When Thomas was 5 and Rose was 3, Clayton and Katherine announced they were officially making Benjamin a full partner in the Triple C Ranch. The papers were drawn up in Jordan Valley, and a small celebration was held at the ranch house. "You have earned this," Clayton said, shaking Benjamin's hand formally. "You came here as a wandering cowboy, but you have proven yourself to be a man of character and ability. This ranch will be in good hands when Katherine and I are gone." Benjamin was overwhelmed with gratitude and determination to live up to the trust placed in him. Katherine watched him that night, surrounded by friends and family, laughing with Thomas on his lap and Rose tugging at his sleeve for attention, and marveled at the journey they had traveled together. As the years passed, the family continued to grow. Another son arrived, then another daughter. The cabin was expanded again and again until it was barely recognizable from the simple two-room structure Benjamin had built for his bride. Thomas grew tall and serious, devoted to the ranch and to learning everything his father could teach him. Rose was bright and adventurous, always underfoot and asking questions. The younger children brought noise and chaos and endless joy. Benjamin's partnership flourished. Under his and Clayton's joint management, the Triple C became one of the most successful ranches in the territory. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, dealt with rustlers and difficult markets, and came through it all stronger. Benjamin proved himself to be a natural leader, respected by his hands and his fellow ranchers alike. Katherine found her own place in the community. She helped other women through difficult births, drawing on her experience with Katherine. She organized a small school in Jordan Valley so the ranch children could receive basic education. She maintained a garden that produced vegetables and flowers against all odds in the harsh climate. She raised her children with love and discipline, teaching them to read and write, to work hard, to treat others with respect. And through it all, her love for Benjamin only deepened. They had their arguments and disagreements as any couple did. There were hard times when money was tight or illness struck the family. But they faced everything together, their bond tested and strengthened by every challenge. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Katherine by taking her on a rare trip away from the ranch. They left the children with Katherine and Martha and rode out to the place where he had first found her, that scrubby juniper tree in the desert that had marked the lowest point of Katherine's life. "Why are we here?" Katherine asked, confused. Benjamin dismounted and helped her down, then took both her hands in his. "Because I wanted to stand in this place and tell you that finding you here was the moment my real life began. Everything before was just waiting. Everything after has been living." Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Benjamin, I know I am not a man of fancy words, but I want you to know that I love you more today than I did the day we married, that I fall in love with you again every time I see you with our children, every time you smile at me across the supper table, every time you fall asleep in my arms. You are my life, Katherine, you and the family we have built together." "You are my life too," Katherine whispered. "You saved me from this desert and you have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, love. You are everything to me." They stood together in that desolate place where death had nearly claimed her, and Katherine thought about the impossible journey that had brought her here. If the wagon train had not left her behind, if Benjamin had not been riding through the desert that day, if the Morrisons had not taken her in, if she and Benjamin had not had the courage to reach for the love they felt, so many small moments of chance and choice that had led to this life. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked softly. "This hard life on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. You could have gone to California, found your uncle, maybe married some wealthy merchant." "Never," Katherine said firmly. "I would not trade a single moment of our life together, not even the hard ones. This is where I belong, with you." Benjamin kissed her then, thorough and deep, and when they finally pulled apart, they mounted up and rode back toward home, toward the ranch that had become their kingdom, toward the children who would be waiting for them, toward the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. The years continued to pass in the way they do, marked by seasons and celebrations and the everyday moments that make up a life. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day management of the ranch. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son and moved just far enough away that Katherine missed her, but close enough that she visited often. The younger children grew and found their own paths. Clayton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, and Katherine followed him just 8 months later, as though she could not bear to be parted from him for long. Katherine mourned them deeply, these people who had taken in a desperate girl and given her a chance at life. Their graves were placed on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built, marked with simple stones that bore their names and dates, and the inscription, "They built a home in the wilderness." With the Morrisons gone, Benjamin became the sole owner of the Triple C Ranch, though he always maintained it was built on their foundation. He ran it with the same principles of fairness and hard work that Clayton had taught him. And Katherine stood beside him as she had from the beginning, his partner in every way that mattered. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Benjamin raised a glass in a toast. "To my wife Katherine, who I found lost in the desert and who found me lost in my own way. To the family we have built and the love that has sustained us through everything. To 25 years and the hope of many more. To family," everyone echoed, glasses raised. Katherine looked around at the faces gathered in the ranch house. At Thomas and his wife and their 3 children. At Rose and her husband and their 2. At their other children, some married and some not, all healthy and happy. At the ranch hands who had become family over the years. At Martha, white-haired now but still ruling the kitchen with an iron hand. This was her legacy. Not the material success of the ranch, though that was considerable, but the family she and Benjamin had created. The love they had nurtured and protected through drought and plenty, through hardship and blessing. The children and grandchildren who would carry their values forward into the future. That night, alone in their bedroom after the celebration had wound down, Katherine stood at the window looking out at the desert landscape silvered by moonlight. Benjamin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. About that girl who stood alone in the desert, certain she was going to die. About how impossible this all would have seemed to her. A husband who loves her. Children and grandchildren. A home and a family and a place in the world. Sometimes I can hardly believe it is real. "It is real," Benjamin said, turning her to face him. "And you earned every bit of it. You could have given up so many times, but you kept going. You are the strongest person I know, Katherine Lawson." "We kept going," Katherine corrected. "Together." They kissed, still full of love and desire for each other after all these years. Some things, Katherine had learned, only grew deeper with time. The seasons turned and the years passed. Benjamin's hair went gray and Katherine's face acquired the lines of a life well lived. Their children married and had children of their own. The ranch prospered and grew, eventually spanning thousands of acres. The territory became a state, and the wild frontier began to settle into something more civilized, though the desert remained as harsh and beautiful as ever. When Benjamin was 60 and Katherine 58, they took another ride out to that juniper tree in the desert where their story had begun. The tree was older now, more gnarled, but still standing against the elements. They sat in its shade, their horses grazing nearby, and looked out at the vast landscape. "We should mark this place somehow," Katherine said, "so people will know what happened here." "What happened here?" Benjamin asked with a smile. "A miracle. Two lost souls found each other in the wilderness and built a life." "That is a good story," Benjamin agreed, "though I am not sure we need a marker. I remember it just fine." "For after we are gone," Katherine persisted, "for the grandchildren and their children, so they know where the family began." Benjamin pulled her close, and they sat together in companionable silence. Finally he said, "All right, we will have Thomas bring out some stones and build a cairn, something simple that will last. Will that satisfy you?" "Yes," Katherine said, content. A month later, Thomas and several of his brothers built a cairn at the site, a neat pile of desert stones that would withstand wind and weather. At the base, they placed a small brass plaque that read, "Here in 1878, Benjamin Lawson found Katherine Keating lost in the desert. Here their love story began. May all who pass by remember that hope can bloom even in the wilderness." Katherine cried when she saw it, moved beyond words by the tangible memorial to the moment that had changed everything. Benjamin held her hand and said nothing, because sometimes there are no words adequate to the occasion. They continued to ride out to the cairn once or twice a year, a pilgrimage to the place where their life together had begun. And as they grew older and their rides became less frequent, their children and then their grandchildren took up the tradition. The story of how Benjamin found Katherine was told and retold, growing in the telling until it took on the quality of legend. But at its heart, it remained a simple, true thing. Two people who found each other against impossible odds and chose love over despair, hope over surrender. Benjamin passed away at the age of 74, peacefully in his sleep after a full day of working on the ranch he loved. Katherine held his hand as he drew his last breath, and though grief tore through her like a knife, she was grateful they had been given so many years together. Grateful for every moment, every memory, every child and grandchild they had created together. She buried him next to Clayton and Katherine on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the entire community turned out to honor the man who had built so much from so little. Katherine stood dry-eyed through the service, her children gathered around her, and felt Benjamin's presence as surely as if he stood beside her. Katherine lived another 8 years after Benjamin's death, spending her days with her family and working in her garden and writing down the stories of their life together, so future generations would know where they came from. She was a great-grandmother many times over, and she took fierce pride in every child who carried her and Benjamin's blood forward into the future. On a spring evening when the desert was blooming with wildflowers and the air smelled of sage and possibility, Katherine passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 82. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, clutching the small wooden bird Benjamin had carved for her all those decades ago. They buried her beside Benjamin on the hill, and on her stone they placed the words she had requested. She was lost in the desert, and love found her home. The ranch continued for generations after, run by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The cairn in the desert became a family landmark, visited by young couples on their wedding days and grandparents wanting to tell the story to eager young listeners. The legend of Benjamin and Katherine grew, but at its heart it remained true. A story of love born from hardship, of hope emerging from despair, of two souls who found each other in the vast wilderness and built something permanent and good. And in the quiet evenings when the desert wind blew across the ranch and the stars emerged in their thousands, those who listened carefully swore they could still hear echoes of their love, in the laughter of children playing, in the quiet conversations of couples on the porch. In the very bones of the land they had claimed and tamed and made their own, Katherine Keating had been left behind when the wagon train moved on, abandoned to die in the unforgiving desert. Benjamin Lawson had found her and taken her home. And in doing so, they had found their way to each other and created a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The end came not with tragedy but with peace, not with regret but with gratitude for a life fully lived. Katherine and Benjamin's story was not of a romance without obstacles, but of two people who faced every challenge together and emerged stronger. They proved that love could bloom even in the harshest wilderness, that hope could survive even the darkest despair, and that sometimes the greatest journeys begin at the moment when we think all is lost. Their great-great-grandchildren still rode out to visit the cairn, still told the story of the cowboy who found the lost girl and loved her for the rest of his life. The ranch still stood, expanded and modernized, but built on the foundation Benjamin and Katherine had laid. And somewhere in the vast desert, that old juniper tree still stood, a silent witness to the moment when two souls found each other and changed the course of their destinies forever. In the end, Katherine's legacy was not in buildings or land or material success, though those things were real and lasting. Her legacy was in the love she and Benjamin had shared, the family they had created, and the proof that even when all seems lost, hope and love can light the way home. She had been abandoned and alone, facing certain death in a merciless wilderness. But she had survived. She had found love. She had built a life of meaning and purpose. And in doing so, she had proven that the human spirit, when combined with love and determination, can overcome any obstacle. The story of Benjamin and Katherine Lawson lived on, told around dinner tables and on front porches, passed down through generations as both history and inspiration. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to our greatest blessings. That being lost can be the first step to being found. That love, when it comes, is worth reaching for with both hands, regardless of the obstacles in the way. And so the desert kept their secrets. The ranch they built stood strong, and the love they shared echoed through time. Katherine had been left behind when the wagon train moved on. Benjamin had found her and taken her home. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story that would be remembered as long as there were people to tell it. Their journey had begun in desperation and ended in contentment, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories start in the most unlikely places and endure long after the lovers themselves have passed into legend.